They beat an old rancher in front of his son, until one Apache warrior rode back for justice. The sun had just begun to rise over the dry, dusty plains of Arizona, painting the sky with soft shades of orange and pink. The air smelled faintly of sagebrush and sun-warmed earth. On the edge of these endless plains sat a small ranch, surrounded by rolling hills and a few scattered mesquite trees. This ranch was modest, but it had been in the McAllister family for generations. Weathered by time and the harsh sun, the wooden fences leaned slightly, and the barns bore the marks of years of storms and heavy winds. Yet there was a sense of pride and calm in the place, a quiet strength that seemed to mirror the family who lived there. Thomas McAllister, the old rancher, stood near the fence, his wide-brimmed hat shading a face lined with deep wrinkles. Every crease told a story, of long days under the sun, of hard winters when the snow blanketed the land, and of summers when the cattle needed every ounce of care. Though his back had begun to stoop and his hands bore the marks of decades of work, Thomas moved with steady determination. Today, like every day, he checked the fence line, ensuring that no cattle had strayed and that no wild animals had damaged the barriers. Beside him moved his son, William, a boy of 16, still growing into the strength of a young man. William had his father's sharp eyes and strong jaw, though his features were smoother and softer, still marked by the innocence of youth. He shadowed Thomas closely, carrying a small leather satchel with tools, water, and lunch. The boy watched his father carefully, absorbing every motion, every gesture. William was learning more than just the work of the ranch. He was learning life, patience, and respect for the land that had sustained his family for so long. "Careful with that post, William," Thomas said, his voice low but firm. "The fence is old here. Don't let it snap back on you." "Yes, father," William replied, steadying the wooden post in place. His hands were roughening from the work, but he was careful. He didn't want to disappoint the man who had taught him to ride, to rope, and to tend to the land with patience. The morning was calm, almost too calm. A soft breeze stirred the dry grass, and the distant mountains stood silent, a timeless witness to the everyday life of the ranch. The cattle grazed lazily, and a few birds flitted from tree to tree. Thomas looked over the horizon, his eyes narrowing slightly. Something felt off, though he could not name it. There had been rumors in the neighboring towns, a gang of men who roamed the plains, taking what they wanted from unsuspecting families. They were cruel, and they left no mercy behind. Most ranchers had fortified their homes or sought safety in numbers, but the McAllisters were alone, miles away from the nearest town.
"Father, are you worried about the men you mentioned?"
William asked, noticing the tension in his father's stance. Thomas shook his head slowly. "I worry about a lot of things, William, but fear won't help us today. We do our work, we take care of what we can, and we watch. That's all any of us can do." William nodded, though his heart raced a little faster at the thought. The idea of men roaming the land, threatening families, made him uneasy, but he trusted his father. Thomas had survived many hardships in his life. Surely they could face whatever came their way. The morning passed with the steady rhythm of ranch life. William led a few cattle to the water trough, while Thomas repaired a broken gate near the barn. They spoke little, the silence comfortable between them. When they did speak, it was about practical matters: which cattle needed extra care, which crops might yield a good harvest, and the rare moments of beauty in their harsh surroundings. By mid-morning, the sun had climbed high into the sky. Thomas and William paused under the shade of a mesquite tree for a brief rest. Thomas offered William a slice of bread and some cheese from a small tin. They ate quietly, listening to the soft humming of insects and the occasional lowing of a cow. "You know, William," Thomas said after a moment, breaking the silence, There's something about this land that teaches a man patience. You can't rush it. You can't fight it. You work with it, and it will give you what you need." William chewed thoughtfully. "I want to be strong like you, Father. I want to take care of the ranch, take care of you, and keep our family safe." Thomas smiled faintly, a small crease forming at the corner of his weathered eyes. "Strength isn't just about muscles, boy. It's about knowing when to act and when to wait, and when to protect what matters most, even if it means sacrifice." Their conversation was interrupted by a distant noise, faint but distinct, the sound of hooves kicking up dust on the hard ground. Thomas froze, listening carefully. William's eyes widened. "Did you hear that, Father?" he whispered. Thomas nodded slowly. "Yes, someone's riding this way. Stay close." From the horizon, a lone rider appeared, moving with purpose but not haste. The man's features were partially hidden by a wide hat and a scarf tied around his face. There was something different about him, a presence that made Thomas's heart beat a little faster. He recognized the rider immediately, an Apache warrior, a man who had helped settlers in this region many years ago, offering guidance, protection, and wisdom. Though he had long disappeared from the towns and ranches, Thomas had always remembered the warrior as a figure of strength and justice. The warrior rode slowly up the path to the McAllister Ranch, stopping just beyond the fence. He removed his hat, revealing sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He nodded respectfully to Thomas and William.
"Good morning, sir," the warrior said, his voice calm but firm. "I've come to see how you fare."
"Times are dangerous in these parts." Thomas studied the man carefully. "We are holding up as best we can. The land is good to us, though we face threats." Your timing is." The warrior's eyes shifted toward the distant hills, then back to the ranch. "I have heard troubling news. There are men on the plains, troublemakers who have been taking what isn't theirs. I do not know if they intend to come here, but they leave fear wherever they go."
William swallowed hard. "Do you think they'll come to our ranch?"
The warrior shook his head slowly. "I cannot say, but you must be ready. Your courage and caution will be your greatest allies." The rest of the morning was spent in careful preparation. Thomas and William reinforced the gates, checked the barn, and made sure their cattle were safely corralled. The warrior offered advice: how to secure supplies, how to watch for signs of danger, and how to stay calm under pressure. Though William was still young, he listened intently, absorbing every word. By midday, the sun was high and relentless, beating down on the ranch. The peaceful rhythm of the morning had returned, but an undercurrent of tension lingered in the air. Every sound made William flinch slightly: the wind brushing against the trees, the distant call of a bird, even the clatter of a loose board in the barn. Thomas placed a reassuring hand on his son's shoulder. "Fear is natural, William. It does not make you weak. It makes you alert. Remember that." William nodded, taking a deep breath. He looked at his father, then at the Apache warrior. In that moment, he understood something essential. The land, the family, and the quiet strength of those who cared for it were worth protecting, and if danger came, they would face it together. As the afternoon sun climbed higher, the ranch seemed to hold its breath, waiting. The gentle sounds of nature continued, yet there was a sense of anticipation in the air, a quiet warning that life on the frontier was never entirely safe. And though neither Thomas nor William could know it yet, the coming days would test their courage, their patience, and their bond in ways they had never imagined. For now, they worked, watched, and prepared, the calm before the storm, unaware that their lives were about to change forever. The afternoon sun climbed higher, beating down on the McAllister ranch with a heat that made the earth shimmer. The calm of the morning had long passed, replaced by a restless stillness. Thomas McAllister worked in the barn, stacking bales of hay neatly, while William checked the fences for any loose boards or gaps. The Apache warrior had ridden off earlier in the morning, promising to return if trouble appeared. But for now, the ranch seemed quiet. William paused near the fence, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his sleeve. "Father, do you really think those men will come here?" he asked, trying to hide the nervousness in his voice. Thomas looked up, his face calm but serious. "I don't know, son, but people who look for trouble often find it, whether we expect them or not. That's why we must stay ready, always ready." The boy nodded, trying to appear brave, but inside his heart raced. He had heard the stories. Families in nearby valleys who had been robbed, beaten, or forced to flee. Those tales had always seemed distant, like shadows in a storybook. But today, they felt dangerously close. By late afternoon, the wind began to shift. The soft breeze that had cooled the land earlier now carried a faint, bitter scent of dust and smoke from the distant hills. Thomas sensed it first, the subtle warning that something was approaching. He paused, placing a hand on William's shoulder. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. William strained his ears. At first he heard nothing but the familiar sounds of the ranch, the lowing of the cattle, the soft rustle of leaves, and the occasional chirp of a bird. But then, faintly, a new sound came across the plains, the steady, deliberate rhythm of hooves on hard ground. Not one horse, but several moving together. "They're coming," Thomas said quietly, a note of steel in his voice. "Get inside the barn, William. Stay low." William's heart pounded as he scrambled toward the barn. Thomas followed him but paused to grab a sturdy wooden stick, one that had served as both tool and defense over the years. The barn doors were old but strong, and they slid shut with a heavy thud. Inside, the smell of hay and leather mingled with the warmth of the sun that had seeped through the gaps in the wood. William crouched behind a stack of hay bales, peering through a small crack in the barn wall. Outside, dust clouds rose in the distance as several riders approached. The gang was larger than William had imagined. 6 men, all rough-looking, their faces partially covered by scarves, hats pulled low over their eyes. They laughed and shouted as they rode, a cruel energy in their voices that made William's stomach twist. "Looks like nobody's home," one of the men said loudly, his voice carrying across the dry air. "Just an old man and a boy, I bet." Easy pickings. Thomas stepped forward, holding his stick tightly. His voice was calm but firm. "Leave this place. You don't belong here, and I will not let you harm my family." The gang stopped for a moment, sizing up the small ranch and the solitary man standing in front of it. One of the men spat on the ground. "Old man, we don't need permission. We take what we want. Step aside." Thomas didn't move. His eyes met theirs, unwavering. "I said leave. You will not find what you're looking for here." For a moment, silence stretched across the dusty land, broken only by the wind and the distant calls of birds. Then one of the men dismounted and moved toward Thomas with a threatening gesture. William froze, gripping the hay bales, his mind racing. He wanted to rush forward, to defend his father, but he remembered the calm strength Thomas had always shown. He had to trust him, even now. The man grabbed Thomas roughly by the arm, shoving him toward the ground. Thomas stumbled, but did not fall completely. "Get away from him!" William shouted, his voice cracking with fear. The gang laughed, their cruelty evident. They struck Thomas, pushing him to his knees and then to the ground. Each blow was harsh, but Thomas tried to shield himself, holding his arms in front of his face and muttering under his breath. William felt a surge of helpless rage. He wanted to fight, to protect the man who had taught him everything, but he was too small, too young and untrained for such violence. "Stop!" Thomas cried, his voice loud and commanding. "You will not take what is ours." But the gang ignored him, their laughter echoing across the plain. William's eyes filled with tears as he watched his father struggle. He clenched his fists, wishing he could summon the strength of 100 men, but all he could do was stay hidden, praying silently that the violence would end. Finally, after what felt like hours but was only minutes, the gang mounted their horses again. They left Thomas bruised, bloodied, and panting on the ground. William rushed to his father's side, helping him sit up. "Father, are you all right?" William asked, his voice trembling. Thomas winced but managed a small smile. "I'll be fine, son. Stronger than you think."
But we must stay alert. They may come back.
William shook his head, trying to process what had just happened. The calm life they had known on the ranch was gone. In its place was fear, anger, and a harsh lesson about the world beyond the safety of their home. They tended to Thomas's wounds as best they could. William fetched clean cloths and water, carefully dabbing at the bruises and cuts. Thomas winced but said little, keeping his focus on teaching William even in the pain.
"Remember this, William," Thomas said quietly, once the bleeding had stopped.
"Courage is not the absence of fear. It's facing what must be faced, even when you are afraid. Today, we survived because we stayed calm and stayed together. That is strength."
William nodded, still shaken but determined.
"I won't forget, Father. I promise." As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the ranch, the two of them sat quietly. The cattle moved slowly in the pens. The wind whispered through the trees, and the world seemed to hold its breath. They were battered, but not broken. From a distance, unnoticed by the gang, the Apache warrior had been observing. He had ridden far to check on other settlements, but had sensed the danger here. As he watched from a ridge, he saw the aftermath of the attack. The old rancher bruised but upright, the boy at his side and the marks left by the intruders. A fire lit in his eyes, quiet but unwavering. He knew what had to be done. Justice would not be denied. The warrior dismounted and approached the McAllister ranch just as the first stars began to appear. His presence was calm, but it carried authority. William noticed him and ran to meet him. "They came, they hurt my father," William said, his voice shaking. "We didn't know what to do." The warrior knelt beside Thomas, examining his injuries carefully. "You did all you could. Courage and care. That is how survival begins. But this cannot go unanswered. Those men must face the consequences of their actions." Thomas nodded, a mixture of pride and relief crossing his face. "I feared for my son's safety most of all. We will rebuild, but we are grateful for your help, if it comes. It will come. I will ensure it. No one should strike a family and walk away unchallenged. Not in this land, not while I can ride." The night settled over the ranch, quiet and heavy with unspoken thoughts. William helped his father into the house for rest, bringing fresh water and bandages. Each movement was careful, precise, and gentle. The two of them worked together in silence, communicating through glances and small words, the bond between them strengthened by the trial they had just endured. Later, as William lay on his cot staring at the ceiling, he thought about the events of the day. The fear, the helplessness, and the anger mingled inside him like a storm. But amidst it all was a spark of hope. The Apache warrior, the protector who had appeared when they needed him most. He realized that courage came in many forms, not just from strength, but from wisdom, timing, and the willingness to face danger for the sake of others. Outside, the stars shone bright over the plains, and the ranch, though battered, remained a symbol of resilience. The wind carried with it a quiet promise that justice would find its way. And though William and his father could not yet know how it would unfold, they felt a sense of comfort in knowing that they were not alone. Tomorrow would be another day, and the threat might return. But tonight, they survived. Tonight, they held on to each other. And in the quiet, under the endless sky, they understood that family, courage, and hope could withstand even the cruelest of trials. The sun had barely risen over the horizon when the Apache warrior, silent and determined, mounted his horse once again. The night had been cool and clear, and the stars were fading as the first light of dawn touched the desert plains. His mind was focused, his eyes scanning the land for any sign of the men who had attacked the McAllister ranch. He knew the terrain well, every ridge, every canyon, every narrow path where a rider could hide or be ambushed. That knowledge, gained over years of living in these lands, was now his greatest advantage. The warrior rode with a quiet purpose. He didn't hurry, but he didn't waste time either. The wind carried with it the smell of dry earth and distant smoke, faint but noticeable. He followed the faint tracks left in the dust, horseshoes pressed into the hard ground, disturbed rocks, and broken twigs. Each sign told a story, and he read them like a book. These were not men who respected the land. They were careless, greedy, and cruel. Their arrogance would be their undoing. As he rode, he remembered the McAllister family, the old rancher, Thomas, brave and unyielding despite the blows he had suffered, and his son, William, young and full of hope, yet shaken by the violence they had witnessed. The warrior had seen fear in William's eyes, but also something stronger, determination. That spark was enough to remind him why justice was necessary. He would not let the gang strike again. By mid-morning, the warrior had caught up with the trail. The dust and tracks led him through a narrow canyon where the walls rose high on either side, casting long shadows. He dismounted briefly, examining the tracks more closely. The gang had split up, leaving signs that some had turned north, while others continued east. It was clear they were scouting, perhaps looking for another weak target. The warrior frowned. Their recklessness could be dangerous, but it also made them predictable. He remounted and continued at a steady pace, keeping to the shadows, moving like the wind through the canyon. Hours passed, the sun climbing higher and beating down on the rocky terrain. Yet the warrior did not falter. He paused only occasionally to rest his horse, sip water, or scan the horizon. Every detail mattered, and he could feel the tension in the air. The land itself seemed to whisper of danger, warning him that the confrontation was near. By afternoon, he had located the gang. They were camped near a dry creek bed, laughing and joking as if the attack on the McAllisters had been nothing more than a game. Chairs were tethered to rocks and small trees, water containers scattered around, and their stolen supplies were being divided carelessly. Their guard was low, their confidence high. The warrior watched from a ridge above, hidden by shadows and rocks, analyzing the situation. He could see their leader clearly, a tall man with a scar across his cheek, speaking loudly, boasting of their conquest.
"That old man didn't even fight back." "Easy money," the man said, grinning.
The warrior's jaw tightened. He knew that confronting them directly would be dangerous, but patience was his strength. He waited for the right moment, watching how the men moved, how they laughed, and how their arrogance blinded them to the world around them. When the sun began to tilt toward the west, casting long shadows across the canyon, he made his move. Quietly, he approached on foot, leaving the horse in a small grove of rocks where it could remain unseen. He moved with precision, each step measured and deliberate. The men continued their careless chatter, unaware of the figure moving through the shadows toward them. Suddenly, a sharp whistle cut through the air. It was low and commanding, carrying a note of warning and authority. The gang froze, eyes scanning the canyon. "Who's there?" the scar-faced man demanded, stepping forward. His confidence wavered for the first time. The warrior emerged from the shadows, standing tall and composed. His presence was calm but undeniable, radiating authority. "I am here for justice," he said, his voice steady and firm. "You attacked a family who did no harm to you. You will answer for your actions." The gang laughed, nervously, attempting to regain their confidence. "And what can you do, stranger? There's too many of us." The warrior didn't move hastily. Instead, he let silence stretch, his eyes locking on to the leaders. Each member of the gang felt the weight of his gaze, a strange mixture of calm determination and the promise of consequence. It was not anger that shone in the warrior's eyes. It was certainty, and certainty, as the gang would soon realize, was stronger than any weapon. "Stand down," the warrior commanded. "Leave the stolen goods and return to where you came from. You will not harm another soul." The leader sneered, drawing a small knife from his belt. "You think we'll just let you scare us off? You're alone." The warrior's movements were swift, but controlled. He didn't strike immediately. Instead, he circled them carefully, forcing them to react to his presence. One member lunged forward, trying to surprise him, but the warrior sidestepped, grabbing the man by the arm and pushing him to the ground with surprising strength. The others hesitated, unsure how to act. The leader's knife swung in a wide arc, but the warrior ducked and disarmed him with a quick, precise motion. Panic began to spread among the gang. Their confidence faltered as they realized the warrior was not an ordinary man. He was precise, skilled, and fearless. Each attempt to attack him was countered, not with excessive violence, but with efficiency. The gang's arrogance crumbled as the reality of the situation became clear. They were not going to intimidate this man, and their actions had consequences. "Enough!" the warrior commanded, his voice echoing across the canyon. "You will leave this land. If you return, you will face the same outcome, and it may not be so merciful next time." The leader, humiliated and shaken, nodded reluctantly. The others followed, gathering their stolen goods and mounting their horses. The warrior watched carefully, ensuring they did not attempt to return. One by one, they disappeared over the ridge, leaving the creek bed empty and quiet once again. The warrior let out a long breath, his body tense but controlled. He retrieved his horse and mounted once more, knowing that his work here was done. Justice had been served, not through anger or cruelty, but through courage, precision, and the willingness to act when others could not. As he rode back toward the McAllister Ranch, the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting warm shades of gold across the plains. He approached quietly, careful not to alarm Thomas and William, who had been tending to the ranch as best they could, unaware that the gang had been dealt with. William spotted the warrior first, running toward him with a mixture of relief and excitement. You did it? You stop them!" he exclaimed, his voice trembling with emotion. The warrior dismounted and placed a hand on William's shoulder. "They will not trouble your family again," he said simply. "But courage alone is not enough. You must continue to learn, to be prepared, and to care for one another." Thomas, still tired from the attack but steady and strong in spirit, stepped forward. "We are grateful," he said, his voice carrying the weight of genuine gratitude. "We could not have faced this without your guidance." The warrior nodded, You faced it with courage. I merely helped ensure the outcome was fair. The afternoon passed quietly, with the family tending to the ranch and the warrior offering guidance and advice. He showed them how to reinforce the fences more securely, how to hide supplies in ways that could not be easily stolen, and how to read signs of approaching danger. William listened carefully, absorbing every word, knowing that these lessons might one day save their lives. As night fell over the plains, the ranch was calm once more. The fire crackled softly in the small hearth inside the house, and the smell of food filled the air. Thomas and William sat together, speaking in low tones about the events of the day. William's eyes were bright, filled with a mixture of relief and awe. "I saw how they looked when they realized you were coming," William said, his voice soft. "I've never seen anyone face danger like that before." The warrior smiled faintly. "Courage is not in the fighting. Courage is in knowing what must be done, and doing it with clear mind and steady heart." William nodded thoughtfully. "I hope I can be like that someday." "You will," Thomas said, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. "But remember, courage is only part of it. Wisdom, patience, and respect for the land and others are just as important. Today, we survived because of all of those things." The warrior prepared to leave as the stars began to appear once more in the clear night sky. "I will ride on now," he said. "But remember this, the land is your home, and courage will protect it, but vigilance and care will keep it safe." Thomas and William watched as he rode off into the distance, the rider's figure silhouetted against the rising moon. The plains returned to their quiet rhythm, the wind whispering through the trees and the cattle settling for the night. The McAllisters were safe for now, but the lesson of the day would remain with them forever. Courage, wisdom, and unity were stronger than fear and cruelty. As they closed the doors to the barn and house, William turned to his father. "Do you think they'll ever come back?" he asked softly. Thomas shook his head, a faint smile on his lips. "No, son. They learned that some families are not to be trifled with, and they learned that justice can come from unexpected places. Remember that, always." And so the McAllister Ranch settled into the night, quiet, safe, and stronger than it had been before. The events of the day had left marks, bruise, scars, and memories, but they had also strengthened the bond between father and son. They had learned the value of courage, preparation, and the power of those who stand for justice. The Apache warrior rode on through the desert, a silent protector, knowing that his work here was done. Yet he remained vigilant, always watching, always ready to return when justice was needed. And under the endless sky of stars and the gentle whisper of the plains, the story of courage, honor, and resilience continued, leaving behind lessons that would last a lifetime. The morning sun rose gently over the McAllister Ranch, casting a warm, golden glow across the fields and cattle. The wind carried the familiar scents of dry earth, sagebrush, and hay. After the harrowing events of the past few days, the ranch seemed calm once more, as if the land itself was sighing in relief. Thomas McAllister stepped out of the house, his back still aching from the blows he had suffered, but his spirit steady. The ranch was quiet, the cattle grazing peacefully, and for the first time in several days, there was a sense of safety. William emerged from the barn, his face still shadowed with the memory of fear, but his eyes held determination. He had learned quickly that courage was not measured by the absence of fear, but by the way one responded to it. The events that had shaken him so deeply were now etched into his memory, shaping him in ways he could not yet fully understand. "Father," William said softly, approaching him, "the land feels different today, like it's breathing again." Thomas nodded slowly, looking over the fence at the wide plain stretching to the horizon. "It is, son."
Life always returns. The land forgives, and so must we.
"But we do not forget the lessons it teaches, and we honor those who help us survive." The Apache warrior had returned briefly the evening before, sharing quiet words of guidance and leaving the family with a sense of reassurance. He had taught William the importance of observing the world around him, of understanding the land, the people, and the signs that danger might approach. Though the warrior had ridden off into the distance, his lessons remained vivid in their minds. That morning, Thomas and William began the slow process of rebuilding. Fences needed repairing, the barn had to be reinforced, and the cattle required careful tending. Every task was performed with a quiet diligence, each movement deliberate and careful. William worked alongside his father, carrying bundles of hay, hammering boards into place, and checking the corral gates. The work was hard, but it was also healing. As the hours passed, the boy spoke more openly about the events, sharing the fear and anger that had bubbled inside him during the attack. "Father," he said, pausing to catch his breath, "I felt so helpless when they struck you. I wanted to fight, but I couldn't. I was scared." Thomas placed a hand on his son's shoulder, his eyes calm and steady. "It is natural to feel fear, William. Fear reminds us of what matters, what we must protect. But courage is what allows us to act, even when we are afraid. You acted with courage, in your own way, by staying calm, helping me, and learning. That is just as important as any fight." William looked down, considering his father's words. He realized that courage did not always mean taking a weapon in hand. Sometimes it meant standing firm, helping others, and remaining clear-headed when the world felt chaotic. By afternoon, the repairs were well underway. Thomas and William had strengthened the barn doors, reinforced the fences, and created a small hidden storage for their supplies, just as the Apache warrior had instructed. They worked in silence at times, letting the rhythm of labor guide them, and spoke at other moments, sharing stories and memories that lightened the mood. "You know," Thomas said, pausing to wipe sweat from his brow, "there was a time when this ranch seemed too big, too lonely, and too hard to manage. But now, after everything, I see its value more clearly."
It teaches patience, strength, and resilience. And it teaches the importance of family.
William smiled faintly. "I understand now, Father. I see that the land and our family are connected. Protecting one means protecting the other." Evening approached, bringing long shadows across the plains. The sky shifted from gold to pink, and then to the deep purples and blues of twilight. The wind carried a gentle chill, rustling the leaves and cooling the air after a hot day. Thomas and William sat on a small ridge overlooking the ranch, their work complete for the moment. The distant mountains glowed softly in the fading light, a reminder of the vast world beyond their home. "I keep thinking about the warrior," William said quietly. "He came when we needed him most. Without him, I don't know what would have happened." Thomas nodded, his eyes following the horizon. "He acted not out of anger, but out of duty and respect. He showed us that justice can be delivered without hatred, and that courage and skill can protect what is right. His example is something we should remember, William. Not just his strength, but his wisdom." William turned to look at his father, admiration clear in his eyes. "I want to be like that someday. Not just brave, but wise, too." Thomas smiled faintly, placing a hand on his son's shoulder.
You will be, son. You already carry the seeds of it.
And every day you learn more. From the land, from those around you, and from the challenges you face. That is how strength and wisdom grow. Night settled over the McAllister Ranch. The sky was clear, stars sparkling like tiny fires in the vast darkness above. The wind whispered through the trees and across the plains, a soft lullaby that carried the promise of peace. Inside, the house smelled of fresh bread and stew, simple comforts that reminded them of the warmth of family and home. William lay in his cot, staring at the ceiling, replaying the events of the past days in his mind. He thought of the gang, their arrogance, and their cruelty. He thought of his father's bravery, the warrior's calm authority, and the strength he had witnessed in those moments of danger. Most of all, he thought about the lessons he had learned, that courage could take many forms, that fear was a guide rather than an enemy, and that wisdom and preparation were as valuable as any weapon. Outside, the ranch was silent, except for the occasional call of a distant owl and the soft movement of the cattle. The world had returned to its natural rhythm, and with it, a sense of healing began to settle over Thomas and William. They were bruised, yes, but not broken. Scarred, yes, but resilient. The Apache warrior, far away, rode through the desert under the light of the moon. His task was complete, yet he remained vigilant, always aware of the needs of those who could not defend themselves. He was a silent guardian, his presence a reminder that justice could be found, even in a harsh and unforgiving land. In the days that followed, life at the ranch returned to a peaceful routine. Thomas and William worked together, tending the cattle, repairing fences, and managing the small crops that sustained them. Each day brought a new sense of purpose, a quiet understanding that survival was about more than just enduring hardship. It was about learning, growing, and cherishing the people and the land that mattered most. William's confidence grew. He rode the horses with skill, tended the cattle with care, and began to take on more responsibility around the ranch. His fear of the gang and the violence they brought had faded, replaced by a deep understanding of courage and vigilance. He began to see himself not just as a boy, but as a young man capable of protecting his family and contributing to the life of the ranch. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, Thomas and William sat together outside the house. The air was warm, carrying the scents of the earth and the soft rustle of the wind. Thomas looked at his son, pride shining in his eyes. "You've grown a lot in these past days, William," he said softly, "not just in strength, but in understanding. Courage, patience, and wisdom. You are learning them all. And that is the greatest lesson any father can hope to teach his son." William smiled, feeling a quiet satisfaction. "I've learned from you, Father. From the warrior, from the land itself. I will continue to learn, and I will protect this ranch, our family, and everything we hold dear." Thomas nodded. "And that is all a father could hope for. You carry the future, William. And the future is strong when it is built on courage, love, and respect." As darkness fell, the stars glittered overhead, and the ranch settled into the quiet rhythm of night. Thomas and William returned to the house, their hearts lighter, their bonds stronger, and their spirits renewed. They had faced fear, endured hardship, and witnessed courage in its truest form. They had survived not just because of strength, but because of wisdom, patience, and the love they held for each other. In the distance, the plains stretched endlessly, a reminder that life continued beyond the ranch, beyond the threats, and beyond fear. The McAllisters had learned that while the world could be harsh and unpredictable, family, courage, and preparation could withstand even the most difficult challenges. And so, under the vast, starry sky, the McAllister Ranch returned to peace. The events of the past days were not forgotten, but they were transformed into lessons of resilience, courage, and hope. William knew that life would continue to test him, that challenges would arise, and that danger might appear again. But he also knew that he was prepared, not just with tools or weapons, but with wisdom, courage, and the unwavering bond of family. The Apache warrior rode on, a silent protector of the land, carrying the knowledge that justice could be delivered without cruelty, that courage could be quiet and measured, and that even the smallest acts of protection could change lives. And somewhere on the distant plains, Thomas and William looked to the horizon, their hearts full of gratitude, understanding, and the quiet joy of survival and hope. For the McAllisters, life would continue, as it always had, with the lessons of the past guiding them forward, and the promise of courage, wisdom, and family carrying them into every tomorrow.